Part 1. The first glance expanded. The church bell rang over the quiet town of Vermont, its sound rolling through the misty air of early autumn. Emily Parker climbed the stone steps, her coat pulled tight against the breeze. She wasn't there out of duty or habit. Faith had never held her strongly. But the church always gave her something she could not find anywhere else: silence. A silence that held her thoughts, her doubts, her restless longing for something more inside. The air was warm, filled with the soft scent of old wood and candle wax. She moved toward the back pew, clutching her small notebook as if it were a shield. That morning, however, something felt different. A new voice echoed through the sanctuary, steady, calm, and deep. Emily lifted her eyes toward the altar and saw him for the first time. Father Daniel Hayes, the young priest recently appointed to their parish. He was nothing like the stern, distant figure she remembered from childhood sermons. His presence was warm, his eyes gentle, his words carrying a kindness that seemed to reach into places Emily had kept locked away. As he spoke, she found herself leaning forward, not so much for the message, but for the sound of him. The way he seemed to mean every word as though it mattered deeply. Emily told herself she was imagining it. But when the service ended and people moved toward the doors, she lingered. She bent to gather stray hymn books left scattered on the benches. As she reached for one, she felt a quiet pause in the air. She looked up and caught his gaze. Just for a moment, long enough to notice, too short to explain. His smile was small, polite, the kind any priest would give a parishioner. But something in the silence between them unsettled her. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and nodded a quick goodbye, leaving before she thought too much of it. Still, as she walked down the steps and out into the crisp morning, the image of his eyes stayed with her. The days after, Emily tried to push the thought aside. Life demanded her attention. She worked at the town library, shelved books, greeted the same familiar faces she had seen for years. Yet every time she passed the church tower from across the street, she felt something tug at her. It was as though the building itself called her back. When the next Sunday came, she returned. Not because of faith, she told herself, but because she needed quiet again. But when she entered the church and saw Daniel at the altar, her heart betrayed her. It quickened in a way she hadn't felt in years, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of being moved. Throughout the service, she tried to keep her eyes on the hymn book, on the candlelight, on anything else. But she kept noticing details: the way he pressed his palms together when he prayed, the pause he took before beginning his sermon, the soft kindness in his smile when he greeted an older couple at the front. He carried himself with a mixture of calm and weight, as though he bore something heavy, yet still found a way to share light with others. Afterward, she stayed again. She told herself it was to help tidy up, to show kindness in return. She stacked hymn books neatly, adjusted candles. But really, she stayed because she knew he was near. Daniel walked past, thanking her softly. His voice was closer now, no longer echoing through the church, but brushing gently against her ears. "Thank you for helping," he said. "It's nothing." Emily replied quickly, her words tumbling out. She lowered her eyes, not daring to hold his for too long. There was no reason for her heart to race at such simple words. No reason for her to linger when she should leave. Yet she did. And in that lingering, something quiet began to grow between them. That night, lying awake in her small apartment, Emily thought of him again. She tried to convince herself it was only admiration, respect for a man who seemed so devoted, so gentle, so unlike the hurried world around them. But she knew better. Deep down, she felt the stirring of something she had not expected. She rolled onto her side, pulling the blanket tighter. It was foolish, she told herself. He was a priest bound to a life where such feelings had no place. She was a woman who had long ago stopped believing love could arrive so unexpectedly. And yet the memory of his gaze, just that one fleeting glance, kept replaying in her mind. Over and over, Emily tried to silence it, to bury it under the weight of routine. But the truth was undeniable. From the very first moment she saw him, something in her had shifted, and though no words had been spoken, though no rules had been broken, The secret had already begun. That's the expanded 1,000-word fast-paced version of Part 1, fully within YouTube's monetization rules. Clean, romantic, emotional, with no explicit or harmful content. Would you like me to now expand? Part 2, in the same style, about 1,000 words, keeping the pace quick and emotional for storytelling. Part 2, a bond beyond words expanded. The weeks moved quickly, and Emily found herself returning to the church more often than she cared to admit. She told people it was for volunteering, for the peace, for the music, but deep down she knew it was for Daniel. He was always there, greeting her with the same calm warmth, never questioning why she came so often. Each time their conversations stretched a little longer, moving beyond polite words into something deeper. One afternoon, Emily stayed behind after a small service. The church was nearly empty, the sunlight slipping through stained glass, scattering colors across the wooden floor. Daniel was arranging hymn sheets, and she offered to help. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same stack of papers. It lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. Both pulled back quickly, pretending not to notice, but something unsaid filled the silence. As days passed, they began speaking of things that had nothing to do with church. Books they both had read, music that moved them, the strange mix of comfort and confinement that came with small-town life. Emily found herself laughing more freely in his presence, her worries easing when he listened. Daniel, in turn, seemed to open up in ways she doubted he did with anyone else. He spoke of his love for writing, his fondness for quiet walks, the loneliness that sometimes shadowed him despite the constant company of his parish. One rainy afternoon, Emily found herself in the church again. The rain hammered against the windows, the world outside gray and blurred. She stood near the doorway, watching droplets slide down the glass. Daniel joined her, his presence close, but not too close. "You don't ever feel trapped?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft, as though the question had been waiting for the right moment. "Like life chose for you before you even had a chance to choose for yourself?" Daniel looked at the rain for a long moment before answering. His shoulders tensed, his expression quiet but honest. "Every day," he admitted. The simplicity of his answer struck her. He didn't hide behind scripture or polite words. He didn't dismiss her question. Instead, he revealed a truth that lived inside him, one she had suspected but never thought he would share aloud. In that moment, the bond between them deepened, invisible yet undeniable. Emily's heart raced. She wanted to say more, to admit that she felt the same way, that sometimes her life felt like a series of choices made by others, and she had simply followed the path laid out. But she didn't. She feared what her honesty might awaken, both in him and in herself. Instead, she let the silence carry her words, trusting he understood. After that day, their connection grew. When she entered the church, he always seemed to notice first, his eyes finding her before anyone else. When he spoke to the congregation, his gaze lingered a little longer on her pew. When they talked alone, there was a softness in his voice, a gentleness reserved only for her. The townspeople, of course, noticed her visits becoming frequent. In small towns, nothing went unnoticed. Emily could hear whispers when she walked into the grocery store or lingered too long at the coffee shop. People said she was too eager to help at the parish, too close to the new priest. She ignored the murmurs, pretending they didn't matter. But in truth, they weighed on her. Still, she couldn't stay away. Each visit felt like a step into something both dangerous and irresistible. She told herself it was harmless conversations, nothing more. But the way her heart lifted at the sound of his voice, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, told her it was already more than that. One evening, after a long day at the library, Emily walked past the church. The doors were still open, light spilling onto the steps. Inside, Daniel was seated at one of the pews, head bowed, as if lost in thought. She hesitated, unsure if she should disturb him. But his voice broke the quiet before she could turn away. "Emily," he said, looking up with a tired smile. "You're here." She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing softly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't," he said, motioning for her to sit. "Sometimes it's nice to have company." They sat in the quiet church, the air thick with unspoken words. Emily watched him closely, the weariness in his eyes, the weight he carried so carefully. She wanted to reach out, to tell him he didn't have to carry it alone. But instead, she simply said, "You don't always have to be strong." Daniel looked at her, his expression raw, as though she had touched something fragile. "Neither do you," he replied softly. Her chest tightened, not with pain, but with recognition. They were both carrying burdens, both hiding pieces of themselves from the world. And in each other, they had found someone who understood. As the days passed, their bond became harder to ignore. When she walked into the church, she felt the air shift. When they spoke, even about simple things, every word carried weight. Their laughter echoed differently, warmer, fuller. Emily knew it was dangerous. She knew feelings like these could not be contained forever. But she also knew she couldn't deny them anymore. Something real was building between them, something stronger than silence, stronger than fear. And yet neither of them dared to name it. The bond was there, undeniable, pressing closer with each day. It lived in the spaces between words, in the glances they shared, in the quiet moments that lingered too long. It was a secret neither of them had spoken, but one that was becoming harder to keep. And though they told themselves they could control it, deep down they both knew this bond was growing into something neither of them would be able to hide. That's the expanded 1,000-word version of Part 2. Written, fast-paced, emotional, clean. And safe for YouTube. MONETIZATION. Would you like me to continue with Part 3, expanded in the same style, about 1,000 words, keeping the pace quick and dramatic for your storytelling audience? Part 3, The Weight of Silence, expanded. The first whispers started small. Emily heard them at the grocery store, hushed voices behind her as she placed apples into a paper bag. "She's at the parish all the time now," one woman said. Another answered, "It doesn't look right." Emily kept her head down, her cheeks burning, pretending not to hear. But inside, every word cut deep. She tried to convince herself it didn't matter. People in small towns always talked. But as the days passed, the glances grew sharper, the conversations quieter. When she entered a room, at the coffee shop, the barista hesitated just a second too long when handing her the cup, eyes flicking toward her with a knowing look. At the library, two regular visitors paused their chatter when she walked by. The town had already decided there was a story. Whether it was true or not, Emily carried the weight in silence. At night, she sat on her porch, staring at the sky while the whispers replayed in her head. She wanted to believe her visits to the church were innocent, that helping stack him books, planning events, or talking with Daniel about life was harmless. But the truth gnawed at her. She knew the whispers weren't entirely wrong. One evening, as the sun slipped low, painting the town in golden shadow, she saw Daniel walking up her path. He was still in his collar, his steps steady but hesitant. She stood before he could knock, her heart already pounding. "You know what people are saying?" Emily said before he even spoke. Daniel paused, his eyes searching hers. His face carried both weariness and resolve. "Yes," he admitted softly. "I know." She looked down, her hands gripping the wooden railing. "And they're not wrong, are they?" Her voice trembled. Not from anger, but from fear of admitting what had been unspoken for weeks. Daniel stepped closer, his voice quiet but steady. "No, they're not." The words hung heavy between them. For the first time, the truth was no longer hidden beneath polite conversations or stolen glances. He had said it aloud, and in saying it, he broke the fragile barrier they had both been holding on to. Emily swallowed hard. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, part sorrow, part longing, part something else she had no name for. "I don't know," he admitted, "but pretending nothing exists between us isn't working anymore." Her chest tightened. Every part of her wanted to step forward, to close the space between them, but fear rooted her in place. Fear of the town, fear of what it meant, fear of what they might lose if they admitted too much. That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His words echoed inside her. Pretending wasn't working. She realized how much effort she had put into silence, into avoiding, denying, convincing herself she only came to the church for peace. But the truth was out now, spoken in his voice, and there was no going back. The next days were harder. When she saw him at the parish, their conversations carried a new weight. Words that once flowed easily now felt heavy, laced with what had been confessed. They tried to act the same, smiling, laughing, speaking of books and music. But every glance carried the memory of that night on her porch. The town's whispers grew louder. One morning, as Emily walked through the market, two women turned away sharply, their laughter cutting off mid-sentence. She could feel their judgment even without hearing their words. She wanted to fight back, to say nothing improper had ever happened, but she knew the truth was more complicated. Nothing had happened, yet everything had changed. Daniel felt the pressure too. He looked more tired each time she saw him, the weight of his position pressing harder as the rumors spread. Still, he didn't avoid her. If anything, he sought her out more often, as though the world's suspicion only reminded him of how real their connection was. One late evening, after a long day at the library, Emily found herself walking past the church. Its doors were closed, but light glowed faintly from the windows. On impulse, she stepped inside. Daniel was seated alone in a pew, his head bowed in thought. He looked up when she entered, his eyes tired but soft. "You shouldn't be here," he said gently, though his tone lacked conviction. "I know," she replied. She sat down beside him anyway. The silence stretched, filled with everything they couldn't say aloud. Finally, Emily spoke. "It's getting harder." Daniel turned toward her, his voice quiet but firm. "I feel it too." Neither of them moved closer, yet the space between them felt charged, filled with all the words they dared not speak. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, though she forced them back. She wanted to ask if he regretted allowing their bond to form, but she couldn't bring herself to. Because the truth was, she didn't regret it. Not even for a second. As she left that night, her heart ached with the weight of it all. The whispers, the stares, the unspoken truths, they were no longer something she could escape. The secret had been theirs alone once, safe in the quiet corners of the church. Now it belonged to the whole town, growing louder with every passing day. Emily knew there was no simple answer. They could step back, create distance, pretend the feelings never existed. Or they could admit everything, risking judgment, scandal, and consequences neither was ready for. But one thing was certain: silence was no longer enough to protect them. The truth was already alive, already spreading, already too heavy to hide. And with each day, it grew harder to carry. That's the 1,000-word expansion of Part 3. Written with fast-paced, clean language, emotional tone. And completely safe for YouTube monetization, no explicit, no harmful content. Do you want me to now expand Part 4 in the same detailed and emotional style? Around 1,000 words to give your story a strong and dramatic conclusion. Part 4, The Secret We Couldn't Hide, expanded. The bell rang on a cold Sunday morning, its sound carrying through the town like it always had. Emily sat in the back pew, her hands trembling in her lap. The church was full, yet she felt painfully alone. The whispers that had once been quiet had grown into something louder, something she could no longer ignore. Eyes followed her when she entered, voices lowered when she passed, as if the entire congregation knew her secret at the altar. Daniel stood with his notes in hand, delivering his sermon. His words were calm, his voice steady, but Emily could hear the strain underneath. He spoke about faith, about truth, about carrying burdens. And though his message was meant for everyone, his eyes found hers again and again. It was as if he was speaking only to her, the weight of their unspoken feelings hidden in every line. Emily's chest ached. She wanted to run to escape the suffocating tension, but she stayed rooted in place. She couldn't look away from him, and he couldn't look away from her. For a moment, the entire world seemed to fall silent. The congregation faded, the words blurred, and all that remained was the connection between them. a bond too powerful to deny. When the service ended, people began to leave, their chatter filling the air once more. Emily stayed seated, her heart pounding. She told herself she should go, that she needed to walk out like everyone else and pretend everything was fine. But she didn't move, not until Daniel stepped down from the altar and walked slowly toward her. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the emptying church. When he reached her pew, he stopped, his face lined with conflict. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was heavy, carrying weeks of longing, fear, and unspoken truth. "You stayed," Daniel said finally, his voice low. Emily looked up at him, her throat dry. "So did you." He glanced around the church at the fading light, the empty benches, the last of the congregation drifting out the door. Then he sat beside her, folding his hands together as though he were about to pray. But his words were not a prayer. "This isn't just my secret anymore," he whispered. "It's ours." Emily's breath caught. She had been waiting in some way to hear those words, yet hearing them aloud made the truth impossible to ignore. She looked at him, really looked at the man who had carried his role with such grace, who had given so much to others, yet had allowed himself this one forbidden connection. And in his eyes she saw the same ache that lived in her. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to ruin your life." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You're not the one ruining anything. These feelings, they exist whether we name them or not. Pretending hasn't stopped them. Hiding hasn't silenced them." Her heart ached with the truth of it. Every glance, every conversation, every quiet moment they had shared it had all been leading here to this confession they could no longer bury. The secret was alive, and it had already grown beyond their control. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. "People will never understand. They don't have to," Daniel replied, his voice quiet but certain. "They'll talk no matter what we do. The only thing that matters is what's here." He touched his chest lightly, his hand hovering over his heart, then looked at her as if to say he meant hers too. The silence between them deepened. Emily felt the weight of every choice pressing down on her. To stay meant judgment. To leave meant heartbreak. Either way, the world they had known would never be the same. She rose slowly, her knees weak, and Daniel stood with her. For a moment, they faced each other in the dim glow of the stained glass. Surrounded by silence, yet filled with everything that words could never capture. "I can't promise I'll be strong enough," she whispered. "You don't have to be," he said. "We'll carry this together." His words wrapped around her like a vow. Not a vow spoken at an altar, not one written in scripture, but a vow of the heart, quiet, dangerous, and real. They left the church separately, as they always did, but everything had changed. Emily walked into the cold air, her steps unsteady yet filled with a strange sense of relief. For the first time, the truth was not locked inside her. For the first time, their secret was no longer hers alone to carry. The days that followed were no easier. The whispers didn't stop, and the stares didn't soften. Yet Emily felt different. When she passed through the market or walked down the street, she carried herself taller. She knew people suspected, but she also knew the truth. What she and Daniel shared was not scandal, not shame, but something real. And Daniel, though burdened by his role, seemed lighter too. His sermons were filled with more warmth, his presence more grounded. Perhaps he found strength in the honesty they now shared, or perhaps he had accepted that love, even in silence had its place in his life. Their story remained unfinished. They did not know what would come next, or how long they could walk this narrow line between duty and desire. But they knew one thing with certainty: their secret could never truly be hidden again. It was written in their eyes, carried in their voices, and alive in the quiet moments that no one else could see. And though the world outside might never understand, Emily and Daniel had stopped pretending. Their truth was imperfect, fragile, and dangerous. But it was theirs, and sometimes that was enough. This is the 1,000-word expansion of Part 4. Written in fast-paced, emotional, clean language, it avoids explicit or harmful material, keeps the romantic and dramatic tone mature and safe, and is fully in line with YouTube monetization. Policies: do you want me to now combine all 4 expanded parts into a full long-form story like a script and narration that you could directly use for your YouTube storytelling channel?